if you've read my manifesto, you know I don't really believe trustee boards should exist, given the current necessity for having them. Yeah, I'd like to see the trustee board publish all their minutes. I'd like to see the maximum amount of transparency from the trustee board, but I also acknowledge that the trustee board is a highly bureaucratic thing where that might not be possible in all cases, and I think that's a really big problem, but I'm not going to make any promises that I can't fulfill. The cases we have had of the trustee board overturning referendum results have been wrong. So I think my biggest problem with the way the trustees make decisions about referendum questions is this idea that somehow what students want can bring the union into disrepute. I think that's ridiculous. Like we are intelligent people. When we vote, we can make a decision for ourselves, and it's not like publicly embarrassing if we all decide that we agree that maybe we don't want to support a really unethical company or something. In terms of the living wage, we have had a lot of trustees in the past talking about this being not feasible. I think that the way you get change to happen is you push and you push and you push and you say this is something, like it is absurd that we are a students' union that is demanding very, very radical things for our students, but we can't even provide our staff with a living wage. I think that's ridiculous, and I do think the way you change things is you just keep on arguing for it until it happens, and you keep on trying to make it happen. I think we will get to a point where it happens, and that will be a good day for EUSA. I think there's a huge problem with transparency. I think we can. I think we're doing stuff, like we're getting a lot better with stuff. We're sending out emails every week now about what EUSA is doing. We are getting better at advertising. We now have meetings where anyone can come and vote. The trustee board is sort of the bastion of non-transparency that we have to have legally. It is a really big problem. I want to see more information about the trustee board, more open decision making, but also like the trustee board should have less power. And I think that because of the legal structures, the way we change that is by having trustees who will take a step back and say, actually, it's not my job to run the union in like. We have structures, we have very good democratic structures that should be doing that. So a few of the candidates are talking about holding the sabbaticals to account in the trustee board. Like that's not the trustee's job. Sabbatical officers are held to account within the democratic structures, which any student can turn up to.
Do you think that the trustee board should publish all its minutes publicly?
I think that perhaps maybe we shouldn't publish all the minutes because there's a lot of difficult decisions there that people are making personally. But I feel that though maybe we shouldn't publish all minutes, we should publish all decisions so students know what's going on in their students' union and how it's being done. If elected, I would believe that I can improve transparency by opening up a stronger blog and a dialogue between sabbatical officers and the student body. This year there's been a lot of confusion about what's been going on. People don't really know what's happening and who's doing it. I mean, a lot of the time people don't know who their sabbatical officers are. And I think that if I can strengthen that through links through Facebook and other social media, I think that's the way that we can do it.
Do you think it's right that trustees can overturn referendum results, and would you be comfortable doing that as a trustee?
I think it's very rare that things like that should happen, but obviously the trustees have a legal obligation to secure the financial security of the union. I mean, if we become financially insolvent, then we couldn't provide a lot of the services that we do now. We couldn't offer the great representation that we currently do, and I think that would be a real shame. So I think there are certain very rare situations where we should have a trustee board that can overthrow or just change referendum decisions if it's in the best interest of the students.
And you say in your manifesto that this year senior reps have acted irresponsibly. And which reps in particular are you talking about? Can you give examples?
Well, I believe that, specifically within the sabbatical team, there's not been a lot of clarity about what's been going on. I mean, the issue with Max Kremer has obviously been drawn out in a long way that shouldn't have been. I think students have been made aware of this earlier on, so that students can voice their opinions earlier and they don't have to resort to an emergency meeting through leaked documents. I think that if this had been more widely broadcast, students would know what was happening, and it could have been dealt with much earlier. I mean, the students have spoken now, they've given their support to Max, and it could have been a lot easier if it had been broadcast earlier so students knew what was happening. I do believe that EUSA has a massive problem with transparency currently. People just don't know what EUSA is a lot of the time. I've spoken to people campaigning and they don't understand. I think there should be notice boards within our unions, within Potter Row, within Tevia, within the library even, where people can see what's going on, what EUSA is, how they can get involved, and basically what it does for them. I mean, these things are really important, and I think people have a lot more faith in the student union. I mean, in the last election, we had candidates standing for all positions. This year, it's a really low turnout of people who want to run, and I think that is an issue with transparency. People don't know what's happening, and I think it's a real shame.
I don't think the trustee board should publish all of its minutes publicly because there's a lot of confidential conversations that go on within the trustee board. However, what I do think it is important to do is publish sort of key things that affect the student body widely. So, for example, on if the issue of a major elected officer having something done against them, that should probably be published. Whereas more, the confidential details of that should be kept confidential. What I think is most important out of the referendum process is it doesn't damage EUSA, as that might impede on its ability to do something later on. Therefore, if there is a referendum question that would seriously bring the organisation to disrepute, I think that it would have to be overturned. However, I think that's only for really exceptional circumstances and not something I'd be willing to do on anywhere near a regular basis. Yeah, I mean, the living wage is something that I really passionately believe in. I think the university recently announcing it's going to be using the living wage is a really important step. I think previous trustee boards have said it's not possible, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be pushing as hard as we can as trustees to make sure that that sort of thing can happen so that we're looking after EUSA staff as much as we possibly can. I think at the moment there has been a few problems with the level of transparency. I think that what we need to do is to make sure that important decisions that are made behind closed doors are announced with a set amount of information that we can make public, because otherwise things drag on and on and on. And then when they do come out, which they inevitably will eventually, everything's in a much worse situation. So I think it's important that for key decisions that are made, that the trustee board announces those regularly, not necessarily full published minutes, but a summary of meetings so that people know what the trustee board is doing and how they're making decisions. You say that the trustee board should publish minutes of meetings, and would you publish everything, or would you?
Yeah, there are some legal restrictions as we've seen, but right now nothing that they do has been published, and that's, I think, one of the biggest reasons there's scandal in the first place, is just because whether or not the decisions they make the students like, they just have no idea what's going on, and that's the biggest problem. And people should be able to hold their elected reps to account by actually knowing what they're doing rather than meetings behind closed doors. So that would be a really big priority, definitely.
So you think that EUSA has a problem with transparency? What steps would you take to improve this?
I mean, mostly is the fact that the information isn't printed online for people to see. The trustee board specifically, nobody knows what they talk about in their meetings, and they say they're not allowed to talk about it, which is not true. That's not fair to students, and it's made up of students, so we should have access to that. And the transparency is mostly just getting the information out there. A lot of it isn't that we have anything to hide, it's just that people don't know about it. And so publicizing that information and making it so that when we are talking about it, we're not using lots of random EUSA words that nobody really understands, just making it so people know it's their union, I don't think that trustees should be able to overturn referendum results. I think that if they reach quorum, that shows you that students are involved and care about it, and that, for example, the Sab Miller decision to boycott Sab Miller, the students voted for it, it should be maintained, and that's part of democracy. You uphold democracy, we shouldn't be able to do that.
So even if it would put EUSA in reputational or financial harm, you wouldn't overturn a referendum?
Well, the financial harm, I think obviously that's a pretty big one. It depends what the question was. So far, something like Sab Miller wouldn't have really harmed EUSA, I don't think. And the reputation thing, like the censorship, I don't think that's something that, I think that was protect the rights of the staff in EUSA, and I think that was extremely important as well. But for the majority of the questions, they're not things that would harm EUSA, and they're things that students want. And like the housing co-op one that I was working on, if that were overturned, that'd be insane. That would so no, we should uphold them to whatever extent we can. I mentioned living wage, expanding EUSA revenue to fund a living wage, and you're asking if that would put EUSA into harm financially, and actually I'm not advocating using any of students' money to do that. I'm just saying expand the money from income that we already have from the alumni, from Potter, from the festival, just make that more efficient so that we can use that money to fund, for example, not just a living wage, though that's really important, but also any renovations that would need to be done so that the rest of the money can be used for students and doesn't have to be, even though they are important projects, obviously.